The security camera captured everything. 7-year-old Leo, silent since witnessing his mother's tragic death, suddenly spoke, but not to a therapist or his father. He spoke to Isabella, the quiet 12-year-old daughter of their housekeeper. Billionaire Arthur Kingsley exploded in fury, seeing not a miracle, but a breach of control. What he didn't realize was that this single moment would expose generations of racial bias, upend both families' lives, and begin the healing they never thought possible. Before we dive into this emotional and eye-opening story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tap that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community, because today you'll see how a single word shattered walls, built from silence, grief, and privilege. Arthur Kingsley stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, staring out at the Manhattan skyline he believed he owned at 45. The white tech mogul had built a towering empire, one of the world's richest men, but not even his billions could fix what truly mattered. His son, Leo, hadn't spoken a word in 2 years, not since the car accident that took his mother, Catherine. Their home, a cold, pristine monument of wealth spanning 3 floors of an Upper East Side high-rise, was managed like a private clinic. Every corner echoed with silence, isolation, and sterile efficiency. The art on the walls was priceless. The human connection inside, nearly non-existent. Arthur poured his energy into the upcoming merger with Global Softa, European tech giant deal that would immortalize his legacy. Meanwhile, Leo's existence was confined to routine, expensive therapies, and rotating caregivers, all of whom failed to reach him. Arthur, consumed by work, kept his distance, relying on twice-daily updates from staff instead of being a father. Then came Mrs. Diane Taylor. Her first day as housekeeper didn't go as planned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kingsley," she said firmly but respectfully. "My summer childcare fell through. I can start next week. If you prefer, you start today." Arthur cut her off, barely glancing up. "My son needs consistency. You were vetted. That's all that matters." "I understand, sir." She hesitated. "My daughter Isabella is 12. She's quiet. I can keep her in the staff lounge. You won't even know she's there." Arthur's eyes narrowed. A black woman, standing before him, asking for exceptions. He didn't say a word, but the weight of judgment hung heavy in the room. "Fine," he finally said. "But she stays in the designated staff areas. The West Wing is completely off limits. That's my son's space. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Diane replied, relief flooding her features. That afternoon, as her mother worked, Isabella wandered past the white marble hallways and into a world unlike any she'd known, rooms the size of apartments, silent as museums. Following a soft rustling sound, she found herself in a sunlit studio and saw a small boy on the floor, lost in his drawing. Leo. Every adult before had brought noise demands to speak, to respond. But Isabella didn't say a word. She simply watched. And for the first time in a very long while, Leo didn't run. He glanced up, then went back to drawing. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was safe, far from the penthouse, in a modest Harlem apartment. Diane raised Isabella alone. Her husband, Marcus, had been wrongfully imprisoned for a robbery he didn't commit, sentenced to 12 years on faulty evidence. Diane had never stopped fighting to clear his name, working multiple jobs just to survive, to keep their daughter grounded. Isabella had inherited her father's eye for art and her mother's quiet strength. When visits to prison became too rare and phone calls too expensive, she sent her father illustrated letters. Her drawings were her voice, her connection, her truth. "Art," Marcus had once told her, "is how we speak when words aren't enough." She remembered that the next day, as she packed her sketchbook alongside her reading books, she saw something in Leo, the way he drew with focus, with need. On the subway, she asked softly, "Mom, the little boy who lives there, What's wrong with him? Diane paused. Nothing is wrong with him, Bella. He's autistic. And he's grieving. That doesn't make him broken. His drawings are good, Isabella said thoughtfully. Maybe better than mine. Diane smiled, then grew serious. You stay clear of him, understand? Mr. Kingsley was very clear about boundaries. We need this job. But fate had other plans. Later that day, while Diane cleaned the master suite, a crisis hit. Leo's behavioral therapist canceled unexpectedly. The head housekeeper panicked. He needs structure, she said. Mr. Kingsley will be furious if Leo misses therapy. With no other staff available, she turned to Diane, and so began the moment everything changed. Could my daughter just sit in the same room with him? Diane asked hesitantly. She doesn't need to interact, Mrs. Chin assured her. He doesn't talk, but someone must be present. His art teacher usually comes tomorrow, so there are supplies ready for use. Diane remembered Mr. Kingsley's stern orders. She hesitated. I'm not sure. Mrs. Chin's voice softened into a near plea. Please, I wouldn't ask if I had another option. Inside the sunlit studio, Leo was quietly arranging colored pencils into a precise rainbow when Isabella entered, guided gently by Mrs. Chin. Leo, she said, though he didn't look up. This is Isabella. She'll be here with you today. As Mrs. Chin slipped away, Isabella found a corner and opened a book, occasionally sneaking glances at the boy. After a few quiet minutes, she opened her sketchbook and began to draw. The soft scratch of her pencil caught Leo's attention. He peeked at her work. Slowly, like approaching a skittish animal, Isabella nudged her sketchbook into view. She'd drawn Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. Leo studied the image quietly, then turned back to his own drawing. When Diane came to collect Isabella, something unexpected had happened. Leo had moved his materials slightly closer to where Isabella sat, still at a distance, but closer. Mrs. Chin noticed immediately and whispered to Diane, eyes wide, he never moves closer to anyone, never. Meanwhile, at Kingsley Technologies, Arthur was battling the subtleties of corporate politics. Despite being the founder and CEO, he was constantly undermined by board members from old money circles. His latest opponent, Ronald Whitfield, the silver-haired CFO with generational connections and a knack for veiled prejudice. During a pre-meeting discussion, Whitfield remarked, the global soft team is concerned about market penetration in urban areas. Perhaps we should target our approach. Arthur knew exactly what he meant. If you're suggesting we tailor our product for what you think urban consumers want, I'll remind you technology needs are universal. Whitfield chuckled. Let's not pretend different demographics don't respond to different strategies. Your company was always positioned toward premium markets. Arthur masked his anger with a cold smile. He'd built everything from the ground up, fighting through bias at every level, only to still hear racism dressed as market strategy. That evening, back at the penthouse, Arthur skimmed through the daily report on Leo. It mentioned the cancelled therapy session and noted a surprisingly positive interaction with the housekeeper's daughter. But Arthur barely registered it. His thoughts were consumed by merger meetings and board politics. Over the next few weeks, Isabella continued joining Leo during his art sessions. Sometimes she read quietly. Other times, she drew alongside him. She began bringing different art tools, watercolors, pastels, charcoal, and Leo observed her closely, often mimicking her techniques with remarkable focus. One afternoon, Isabella broke the silence. My dad taught me to draw, she said softly, not expecting a reply. He said art's like having a conversation without words. Leo kept drawing, but she noticed him shift slightly angled, just enough to show he was listening. He's in prison now, for something he didn't do. I send him pictures of our old neighborhood, our park, stuff to help him remember. She held up her current sketch. a lively street scene of brownstones and neighbors sitting on stoops. We used to live here, before it got too expensive. Leo studied the drawing. Then, without a word, he pushed a fresh sheet of paper toward her dot, and with practiced hands, he drew his own view, the city skyline as seen from his window towering, buildings piercing the clouds, with tiny people far below. It was his way of answering her, of saying, "This is my world." Have you ever witnessed a moment so powerful, it shifted everything? A single word, a quiet breakthrough. Years of silence, suddenly shattered. That's exactly what happened on a rainy Tuesday in the Kingsley penthouse. That morning, chaos struck. Leo's art teacher called in sick, throwing his rigid routine into jeopardy. Mrs. Chin approached Diane with barely concealed worry. "I know this isn't ideal," she whispered, casting a glance at Arthur's closed office door. But could Isabella join Leo again? He responds so well to her. And Mr. Kingsley, he has an investor meeting today. If Leo becomes upset, the threat didn't need to be spoken aloud. Diane hesitated. For weeks, Isabella had been spending more time with Leo than anyone realized. What began as incidental visits had become daily rituals, with Mrs. Chin quietly allowing them to continue. "She's got a mild cold," Diane admitted. "Nothing serious, just a summer bug." Mrs. Chin looked desperate. "Please, just today." Diane nodded. "Okay, but she'll keep her distance." In the sunlit studio, Isabella sat cross-legged on the floor, facing Leo, at a respectful distance. Over time, that space had closed naturally, never with words, never with touch, just presence. Today, she was showing Leo how to blend watercolors, creating soft gradients that faded from dark to light. "You need more water here," she explained, demonstrating on her paper. "See how it softens." Leo watched with rapt attention. He had begun to make drawings, just for her scenes from her stories. Her father, her school, her block. It was how he showed he'd heard her, that her words mattered, and Isabella had started to develop a habit of Isabella had developed a gentle habit talking to Leo, as if he might one day answer. She never pressured him, never asked him to speak, but always left space. She treated his silence as a choice, not a flaw. "I think this might be my favorite painting ever," she said one afternoon, studying her nearly finished watercolor landscape. "My dad would say the clouds need more definition, though he's really good at skies." She smiled at the memory, though it tugged at her heart. Suddenly she sneezed a small, sharp sound that shattered the quiet, without lifting his head. Leo's voice slipped out, soft and clear. "Bless you." Isabella froze, her brush still in the air. 2 words, simple, automatic. But from Leo, they were an earthquake. A miracle. She forced herself to stay calm, to keep painting, to treat the moment like it was nothing extraordinary, though her heart was thudding in her chest. "Thank you," she replied gently, as though they'd been talking all along. Inside, she knew exactly what had happened. Leo had spoken. For the first time in 2 years, Leo continued painting, as if unaware that he had just cracked open the silence that had defined his life for so long. What neither child knew was that the moment had been recorded. The penthouse, outfitted with high-end security systems, captured every room. Arthur Kingsley could access the live footage from his phone or tablet at any time. That afternoon, during a lull in back-to-back meetings, Arthur received an automated alert, movement in Leo's studio outside scheduled hours. Mildly irritated, he opened the security feed, ready to remind the staff about protocol. But what he saw made him go still. The housekeeper's daughter, Isabella, was sitting next to his son. Not nervously, not like a first-time visitor, but with ease, as though she'd been there before. He watched as she sneezed, and then Leo spoke. Arthur heard it, clear as day. His son silent for 2 years, unresponsive to world-renowned experts, had just spoken to this girl. This stranger, the daughter of a housekeeper. Rage rose in him like a tidal wave. Betrayal, confusion, jealousy. He stood abruptly, left his meeting without a word, and headed back to the penthouse. He found Diane in the dining room, polishing silver. "Mr. Kingsley," she said, startled by his sudden presence and his thunderous expression. "I wasn't expecting." "Where is she?" Arthur demanded, his voice sharp and low. "Your daughter, where is she?" Diane straightened, sensing danger in his tone. "She's in the staff room, reading." "No, she's not," Arthur snapped. "She's with my son, against direct instructions." He shoved the tablet at her. The security footage played silently between them. "How long has this been going on?" he barked. "What are you trying to pull?" Diane's eyes widened as she watched the video, saw Leo's lips move, heard his voice. I didn't know," she began. "Don't lie to Arthur growled. "You've been using your daughter to manipulate my son for what? Money? A lawsuit? What's your angle?" "Manipulate," Diane repeated, her shock hardening into offense. "My daughter has done nothing but be kind to your son." He responded to her because she's been coached. Arthur spat. "What did you tell her to do? What did you promise her?" "My angle," Diane said quietly, holding his furious gaze, "was accepting a job, cleaning your home, feeding my daughter. Isabella sat with Leo because your own staff asked her to when his therapist canceled." Arthur's expression faltered. "Maybe." He spoke to her, Diane continued, "because she treats him like a human being, not a problem to solve." That hit its mark. Arthur's face flushed. His power filled the room like static electricity. "I've given my son everything," he hissed. "The best care, the best specialists, and yet," Diane said gently. He spoke to her. The footage kept playing, Leo and Isabella painting side by side in peaceful silence. Their moment of quiet connection stood in stark contrast to the rage simmering between the adults. "You're fired," Arthur snapped. "Collect your daughter and your things. Security will escort you out." He turned on his heel. "Mr. Kingsley," Diane called after him, her voice steady. "Before you do something you'll regret, ask yourself why. Why did your son speak to Isabella and not to you?" Arthur paused, but didn't answer. What neither of them saw was that Leo, in search of more blue paint, had wandered into the hallway just in time to see his father yelling at Isabella's mom. He didn't need to hear the words. He could feel the anger, the threat, the unfairness. He slipped away without a sound, returned to his room, and began tearing his drawings to shreds, one by one. Quietly, methodically, every piece he'd made since meeting Isabella, gone. Would you have reacted like Arthur? Comment 1, if you think his anger was justified. Comment 2, if you believe he overreacted to his son's breakthrough. Hit that like button if you've ever seen how children form connections adults can't explain. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story isn't over. What happens now that Leo's only connection has been severed? Will Arthur realize what he's destroyed before it's too late? Let's find out. Security gave Diane and Isabella just 30 minutes to leave. No explanations. No apologies. They packed what little they had. Isabella clutched her sketchbook tightly as they rode the elevator down all 82 floors. "Why are we leaving?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What did I do wrong?" she asked me over and over, Diane whispered, trying to keep her voice steady as she packed their things. "What did I do wrong, Mama?" "You did nothing wrong, baby," Diane repeated. "Nothing at all." But the consequences of Arthur's decision were immediate and devastating. By evening, Leo refused his dinner, rejected his medication, and would not interact with anyone. When Arthur returned from his business meetings, Mrs. Chin met him at the door, uncharacteristically blunt. "Sir, Leo's in distress," she said. "He's torn up all his art supplies. He's locked himself in his closet. The night nurse suggests calling his psychiatrist. Arthur waved her off. He's had tantrums before. Follow the behavioral protocol. But this was different. When Arthur finally visited his son near midnight, he was stunned by the scene. Leo's room looked like a storm had passed through. Shredded paper blanketed the floor. Pencils were snapped. Paint was smeared across the walls. Leo was curled up inside his closet, rocking back and forth, fingers red and raw from tearing and breaking everything he could reach. Arthur's chest tightened. His exterior remained cold, but something cracked inside. "Leave us," he told the night nurse, who hesitated, then exited. Arthur knelt at the closet door. "Leo," he said, trying to soften his voice, "this isn't acceptable behavior." Leo didn't react. He just kept rocking, eyes unfocused. For the first time, Arthur truly saw his son not as a problem to fix or a responsibility to manage, but as a child in pain. And he realized, with dawning horror, how little he really knew him. The next morning, Arthur canceled all his meetings and sat in his office for hours, reviewing surveillance footage from the past month. What he saw stunned him. Isabella hadn't manipulated Leo. She'd connected with him. She read him stories. She shared memories of her father. She showed him drawing techniques, and Leo responded not with words, at first, but with body language. His posture changed around her. He seemed calmer, focused, open. Meanwhile, across town, Diane faced her own crisis. Without a reference from Arthur Kingsley, getting another job would be nearly impossible. Her rent was due in 2 weeks. Savings were nearly gone. Worse, whispers had already started among domestic staff. Networks rumors about unprofessional conduct and boundary violations. Her name was being quietly blacklisted. Isabella withdrew into silence, spending hours drawing scenes from Leo's studio as if trying to preserve their time together. "He's all alone now," she told her mother quietly that night. "He trusted me, and now I'm gone," without even saying goodbye. Across the city, Arthur sat with Dr. Rebecca Winters, Leo's lead psychiatrist. After reviewing the footage, she said, "It's clear your son formed a genuine connection with Isabella. His speech wasn't coerced, it was the result of trust." Arthur's jaw clenched. "Are you saying I overreacted?" Dr. Winters met his gaze. "I'm saying your son spoke for the first time in 2 years, and instead of nurturing that progress, you removed the one person he trusted. That kind of disruption can cause serious regression." The words stung, but they rang with truth. Arthur had acted out of hurt, suspicion, and if he was honest, jealousy. "What should I do?" he asked quietly. "Reconnect them," Dr. Winters said. "Not immediately. Leo needs stability first, but when possibly is, if the girl is willing." She hesitated, then added, "And you need to understand why Leo felt safe with her but not with you." Arthur left the session shaken. For the first time, he was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Had he been so focused on fixing his son that he'd never actually been with him? At Kingsley Technologies, trouble was brewing. Arthur's abrupt exit from a critical investor meeting had sparked doubt. Ronald Whitfield, his calculating CFO, pounced. "He's distracted," Whitfield whispered over lunch to select board members. Understandable family troubles. But with the global soft merger at such a delicate stage, the implication was clear. Maybe Arthur wasn't fit to lead. When Arthur returned to the office the next day, he sensed the shift immediately. Conversations went quiet when he entered. His assistant seemed tense. Trust was eroding. That afternoon, during a key strategy session, Whitfield made his move. "Arthur, we're concerned about you," he said, voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe it's time to take a brief step back to focus on family. The merger needs full attention." Arthur recognized the power play. Normally, he'd have countered swiftly, but for once, The empire he'd built felt less urgent than the little boy who had never once spoken to his own father but had spoken to a housekeeper's daughter. That night, after another failed attempt to reach Leo, Arthur poured himself a rare scotch and opened Diane Taylor's HR file. He read it carefully this time. A former paralegal gave up her career to care for her wrongfully imprisoned husband. Flawless employment history. Steady, resilient, loyal. He'd never even tried to understand her. The next morning, another blow arrived. Leo's pediatrician called blood work. Shows concerning weight loss, he said. Signs of dehydration, too. If he keeps refusing food, we'll need to hospitalize him. Arthur felt the words like a punch to the chest. His son, wasting away because of him. He made his decision. Find Diane Taylor's current address, he told his head of security, and cancel everything on my calendar tomorrow morning. Arthur hadn't driven himself in years, but that morning, he dismissed his chauffeur. He needed privacy. The GPS led him deep into Brooklyn. He pulled up to a worn 6-story walk-up, a far cry from his penthouse. He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Would Diane even speak to him? The building had no doorman, just a buzzer panel with faded nameplates. He pressed the one marked Taylor JSON and waited, straightening his tie nervously, an unfamiliar feeling. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Just as he debated leaving, an elderly woman exited the building, eyeing him warily. Looking for someone? She asked, blocking the door with her hip. Diane Taylor, Arthur replied. It's important. Her face hardened. You're the one who got her fired. She's not here. She's at her new job, cleaning the community center to keep her place. She gave him directions, then added, You should be ashamed. Those two are good people. Arthur found the community center easily. Inside, a staff member directed him to a multi-purpose room. Diane was there, cleaning up after a children's event. She looked up and froze when she saw him. Mr. Kingsley, she said carefully. Did you come to accuse me of something else? No, Arthur said, awkward and out of place. I came to apologize. She studied him, surprised but guarded. Your son? She asked after a beat. The question was genuine. Arthur looked down. Not good. He's not eating. Destroyed everything in his room. They're talking about hospitalization. Diane's face fell slightly. I'm not surprised, she said softly. Isabella's not doing well either. She barely eats. Draws Leo's studio over and over. Says she didn't even get to say goodbye. Arthur had thought only of Leo's suffering. It hadn't occurred to him that Isabella might be hurting too. I was wrong, he admitted. About you? About her? I watched the footage. She was kind. And he responded. Diane said nothing, simply waited. I'd like her to visit him, Arthur added. I'll compensate you both. Of course. Diane cut him off, her voice firm. My daughter isn't for sale, Mr. Kingsley. She's not a therapy tool. Arthur flushed. That's not what I meant. I don't know how to help him. And somehow, she does. Maybe, Diane said, because she sees him as a friend, not a diagnosis. Before Arthur could reply, his phone rang. It was Dr. Winters. Leo's non-responsive, she said. He's being taken to the hospital for evaluation. Arthur's face went pale, and in that moment, he realized he didn't need another business deal. He needed to save his son. I have to go, Arthur said abruptly. Leo's being hospitalized. He handed Diane his business card. Please, think about it for both children. As he rushed to the hospital, Arthur's thoughts spiraled. Dread, guilt, realization. How had I become so disconnected from my son that a child could reach him when I couldn't? At the hospital, Dr. Winters met him in the private suite arranged for Leo. He's physically stable, she assured him, but his emotional withdrawal is concerning. He's completely shut down. Arthur stood silently by Leo's bedside, staring at the small figure curled into himself, turned away from the world. I found Diane Taylor, Arthur finally said. I asked if Isabella could come visit Leo. Dr. Winters nodded. That's a good step. She hasn't said yes yet, Arthur admitted. I think I handled it poorly. I offered money instead of honoring the connection, Dr. Winters finished gently. Arthur nodded, uncomfortable with the truth in her words. In the meantime, she continued, I'd like you to try something. Talk to Leo about his art, not as therapy, as a task. Just show interest. Make it matter to him. It sounded simple, but to Arthur, it felt daunting. He pulled a chair to Leo's bedside. I saw your drawings, he began, awkwardly. The ones you made with Isabella, they were really good. Leo didn't respond. Still, Arthur continued. He talked about the colors, the scenes, the little details from the footage he remembered. He asked questions, even without expecting answers. After nearly an hour, he noticed a subtle shoulders had relaxed slightly. He still didn't look at Arthur, but he wasn't as tense. A tiny victory, but one Arthur clung to. Meanwhile, in their small Harlem apartment, Isabella sat at the kitchen table, working intently on a project. She was making a handmade book, filled with illustrations and stories from her time with Leo. What are you working on, baby? Diane asked, setting down groceries. Something for Leo, Isabella replied without looking up. Even if I can't see him again, I want him to have this, so he knows I didn't just leave. Diane watched her daughter's quiet determination and thought about Arthur Kingsley's visit. You really care about him, don't you? She asked. Isabella nodded. He understands things differently, but he does understand. He listens better than people who talk all the time. The insight, so simply stated, stopped Diane cold. She had been focused on Arthur's accusations, on the injustice, on their financial instability, valid concerns, all. But maybe something more important was at stake. If you could see Leo again, she asked gently, would you want to? Isabella looked up, hope flashing in her eyes. Is that really going to happen? I don't know yet, Diane admitted, but Mr. Kingsley came to see me. Leo's in the hospital. Isabella's eyes widened with alarm. Because of me? Because I left? No, sweetheart, Diane said quickly. Not because of you. Because sometimes adults make mistakes, and kids pay the price. Mr. Kingsley made a mistake. That evening, Arthur returned to the penthouse to collect a few of Leo's things. The apartment felt vast and empty, cold. On impulse, he entered Leo's studio, really, seeing it for the first time. Most of the art had been destroyed during Leo's breakdown, but under the table, Arthur found a folder. Inside were drawings Leo had hidden, protected from his own outburst. They were all of Isabella. Some captured her reading. Others showed moments from the stories she had told him. But one drawing stood out, Leo and Isabella sitting side by side, and behind them, a tall man watching. Arthur looked closer. It was him, not standing apart, not angry, not a barrier. He was part of the scene. Included tears filled Arthur's eye stares. He hadn't let fall since Catherine's death. He had built walls to protect himself from pain, never realizing he had trapped his son inside those walls too. The next morning, Arthur sat beside Leo's bed, reading from a children's book about famous artist Dr. Winters' suggestion. Midway through a paragraph, his phone rang. He stepped out into the hallway to answer. It was Diane. Isabella wants to see Leo, she said without hesitation. Not for money, not for therapy, just as his friend. Arthur exhaled, something in him loosening. Thank you, he said. Have you ever reached that moment where everything falls apart just before it begins to rebuild? When truth shatters the armor we wear, and we're left standing in the raw, uncertain light of what really matters. That was the moment both the Kingsley and Taylor families now faced. 3 days after Leo's hospitalization, Arthur arranged Isabella's first visit. Dr. Winters had prepared everyone. Low expectations.com environment. Zero pressure. A quiet meeting room was transformed into a gentle art space with soft light, quiet colors, and simple supplies. Remember, Dr. Winters told Arthur this isn't about getting Leo to talk. It's about re-establishing trust. You'll observe, but stay out of it. Let them find their rhythm. Arthur nodded, though inwardly, it felt like failure. His instinct was always to act, to control. Letting go felt terrifying. When Diane and Isabella arrived, Arthur noticed immediately how different the girl looked in person. Smaller, more cautious, her confidence muted by the unfamiliar space. "He's inside," Arthur told her. "We didn't tell him you were coming, just in case. In case I changed my mind," Isabella said, finishing his sentence with a calm, direct gaze. "I wouldn't do that to Leo." Arthur stepped aside, letting her into the room where Leo sat at a small table, listlessly dragging a crayon across a page, through the one-way mirror. The adults watched as Isabella sat down silently across from him. For a long time, nearly 20 minutes, Leo made no sign of recognition. He didn't look up, didn't speak. Just drew. Isabella, undeterred, unpacked her pencils, arranged them, slowly, and began to draw. Arthur shifted, tension creeping back. "Should we?" "No," Dr. Winters said firmly. "Give them time." Then, it happened. Without a word, Leo pushed his paper toward Isabella. It was a gesture they'd seen in hours of past footage. A quiet offering, his way of saying, "I see you." "I remember." Isabella smiled and slid one of her drawings toward him in return. "He's back," Dr. Winters whispered. "He knows her." The rest of the visit passed without speech, but full of connection. No eye contact, no conversation, just two children, drawing in tandem. As their time ended, Isabella carefully placed one final sketch in front of Leo. "This one's for you," she said gently. "I made more at home." When Diane and Isabella turned to leave, Arthur stood awkwardly. "Would you come again tomorrow?" he asked, directed more at Isabella than her mother. Isabella glanced up at Diane, who hesitated. "I have a job interview across town," she said. "Getting here might be difficult." Arthur was quick to respond. "I'll send my a car service, if that's better." Diane gave a small nod. "We'll try." Back in Leo's hospital room, Arthur found his son holding Isabella's drawing, picture of two children painting beneath a bright sun. It was the most present Leo had looked in days. That night his vitals improved. He ate a small meal. Dr. Winters directly credited Isabella's visit. Over the following weeks, a new rhythm formed. Isabella visited regularly. Leo's appetite returned. He began sleeping through the night. Eventually, he was discharged and continued his therapy back at the penthouse. Arthur, too, changed. He noticed Diane's quiet struggles, her rejection letters, the way she juggled everything without complaint. One afternoon, while Isabella and Leo painted, Arthur spoke with Diane in the hallway. "You were a paralegal before," he said, referencing her file. Diane nodded cautiously. "For 7 years. I left when Marcus was incarcerated. The hours didn't work for a single parent. Have you ever thought about going back to the field?" She let out a tired laugh. "With a 5-year employment gap, and a husband still in prison, law firms don't exactly line up to hire me." Arthur nodded slowly. The conversation might have ended there, if Isabella hadn't come bursting out of the room, clutching a new sketch. Leo's room was quiet when Isabella entered, but her face was troubled. "He's upset today," she reported to Arthur and Diane. "He keeps drawing police cars, and people being taken away." Alarmed, Arthur and Diane followed her back into the studio. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor, intensely focused on a drawing. The image was striking and disturbing. police officers separating a family, a man being shoved into a police car while a woman and child stood crying nearby. "That's my dad," Isabella said quietly, when they took him away. "I must have told Leo about it." Arthur leaned in, studying the page. The badge numbers, the street sign, even the exact model of the police cruiser. It was all too detailed for Leo to have imagined. This looks accurate," he said slowly, turning to Diane. "Is it?" Diane, pale, nodded. "Almost exactly. But how could he know all of this?" She trailed off, the answer dawning on her. "Isabella's been telling him stories about our family, about Marcus." Arthur felt a surge of protectiveness. Maybe we should guide their conversations towards something more positive, he suggested cautiously. Diane's expression hardened. "You mean censor what my daughter shares with her friend?" she shot back. "Isabella's father was wrongfully convicted, Mr. Kingsley. That's our reality. If they're going to have a real friendship, it can't be sanitized for your comfort." Her words hit him like a slap honest and undeniable. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. Ronald Whitfield calling for the third time that day. "Work?" Diane asked, noticing his tense expression. "Nothing important," Arthur replied automatically. But the truth was, Whitfield had been orchestrating a quiet coup undermining Arthur with the board, using his recent absences and personal distractions as ammunition. Now, rumors swirled that GlobalSoft was considering cutting Arthur out of the merger altogether. Under normal circumstances, this kind of power struggle would have consumed Arthur's focus, but now, Leo's well-being took precedence, a shift that both surprised and unsettled him. That evening, Arthur received a call from his chief legal counsel. "We need to talk," she said gravely. "The board's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. Whitfield is making a play for temporary control during the merger. He's saying your personal issues are compromising your judgment." Arthur had seen this coming, but not this fast. "On what grounds?" he asked. "He's citing missed meetings, ignored calls, and alleged concerning behavior with staff. He's painting you as unstable, a liability." Arthur paced the penthouse, strategy swirling in his mind. "I built Kingsley Technologies, and now that I'm finally choosing my son, I could lose it all." The next morning, Arthur checked on Leo, was having breakfast with his therapist before heading to the boardroom. Tension was thick in the air. Board members avoided eye contact, shuffling papers and feigned distraction. Whitfield sat confidently at the far end of the table, wearing a mask of concern. "Arthur," he began, once formalities were done, "this meeting is out of genuine concern for both you and the company." What followed was a carefully crafted takedown, Whitfield reciting examples of Arthur's supposed neglect, his erratic decisions, his inability to separate personal matters from professional responsibility, all delivered with false sympathy and sharp intent. When Whitfield finished, Arthur sat silently. He scanned the room. Faces that had once celebrated his leadership now stared back impassively. Finally, he stood. "You're right," he said. "I have been distracted." He paused as murmurs rippled around the room. "My son was hospitalized." More shifting, uneasy glances. "But what you've misread is why I was distracted. This isn't about weakness, it's about clarity." He buttoned his jacket, a deliberate, steady motion. "For years, I prioritized this company over everything, including my family. That ends today." He nodded to his legal counsel. "Julia, please distribute the files." As folders slid across the table, Arthur continued, "You'll find documented evidence of discriminatory practices within Whitfield's division. Emails where he refers to our urban expansion as charity work and suggests we hire diversity for appearance while keeping business as usual." Color drained from Whitfield's face as the board began reading. "There's more," Arthur added. "Unauthorized meetings between Whitfield and GlobalSoft executives where he presented himself as the de facto head of Kingsley Technologies. He returned to his seat at the head of the table. Now, shall we talk about who's really neglecting their responsibilities? The meeting stretched for hours. Whitfield resigned. The board gave Arthur a unanimous vote of confidence. But as he left, Arthur felt no triumph on the emptiness. He had won the battle, but he wasn't sure he wanted the war anymore. Later that day, as Isabella sketched quietly with Leo in his studio, Diane approached Arthur with news. "I got a job offer," she said, a weary smile on her face. "Office manager at a law firm in Manhattan." Arthur congratulated her, genuinely pleased, till she added, "The partner was very clear. They want me because representing the Kingsley family would be good for business. They're hoping you'll bring your company's work to them." The implication was unmistakable. Arthur frowned. "What did you say?" "I declined," Diane said calmly. "I won't be hired because of who my daughter knows. Not again." He admired her resolve, though he could see the toll it took. "What now?" he asked gently. Diane sighed. "We keep looking, but if something doesn't change soon, we'll have to move further out, which means Isabella's commute to see Leo gets longer." Arthur spent that evening deep in thought. He could erase their financial burden in seconds, but Diane's independence mattered. He wouldn't insult her by disguising charity as opportunity. Then, his phone rang. It was Dr. Winters. "Leo spoke again today," she said, her voice emotional. After Isabella left, he asked when she would come back. Arthur's throat tightened. "What did you say?" "I told him the truth, that she comes when she can, but she lives far away." He understood, but he was disappointed. Something clicked. A decision crystallized. "I think I might have a solution," Arthur said. That Saturday, Arthur invited Diane and Isabella to the penthouse. Diane arrived, guarded, bracing for restrictions or worse. The end of the visits now. That Leo had spoken. Instead, Arthur greeted them, casually in jeans. Not a suit waiting in the kitchen, rather than his office. "Thanks for coming," he said, offering her coffee. "Isabella's with Leo and the art therapist. I hoped we could talk." Diane nodded, cautiously accepting the mug. Arthur hesitated, then slid a folder across the counter. "I have a proposal. Not charity," he added quickly. "A real opportunity. One that helps both of us." "What is this?" Diane asked, eyeing the folder, but not opening it. "The Marcus Taylor Legal Defense Fund," Arthur replied. "My team has been reviewing your husband's case for weeks. They found substantial grounds for appeal. Procedural errors. Possibly suppressed evidence." Diane froze, stunned. "Why would you do this?" she finally asked. Arthur paused, choosing his words carefully. "At first, for Leo and Isabella, their friendship changed everything. But the more I learned about Marcus's case, the more it became about justice." He continued. "The evidence was flimsy. The ID process was flawed, and his public defender was handling over 70 cases. It's outrageous." Diane opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a detailed legal strategy, investigative notes, and proof of a trust fund established to cover all expenses, regardless of outcome. "This is," she began, overwhelmed. "I don't even have words." Arthur nodded. "The top lawyers in the city are ready to start. All they need is your authorization and a meeting with Marcus." Diane looked up, cautious. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing," Arthur said, firmly. "This has nothing to do with Leo or Isabella's visits. That's their decision. This is about what's right." "I don't understand," Diane said softly. "Why would you do all this for a stranger?" Arthur hesitated. "Because I can. Because it's right. And because watching Leo with Isabella reminded me wealth means nothing if you don't use it to make a difference." He took a breath. "My wife, Catherine. She would have done this without hesitation. I've spent 2 years hiding from her memory instead of honoring it. Just then, Isabella burst into the kitchen, glowing with excitement. "Mom, Leo asked me if we could go to the park sometime." He actually asked. She stopped, noticing the serious expressions. "What's going on?" Diane closed the folder gently. "Mr. Kingsley is helping us with Daddy's case," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Some of the best lawyers in New York are going to try to bring him home." Isabella looked at Arthur, studying him with eyes far older than her years. "Why?" she asked simply. Arthur smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the answer felt easy. "Because it's wrong that your dad's not home," he said. "And because sometimes, doing the right thing means helping someone you didn't have to." "My father's in prison for something he didn't do," Isabella said. "And because you helped my son when no one else could," Arthur replied softly. Isabella paused, then gave a single, solemn nod, a gesture far older than her years. "Thank you," she said simply. Then she added, "Leo wants to know if we can have lunch in the garden room today. He asked me to ask you." Both adults registered the weight of her words. Leo had made a request. He'd expressed a preference. For a child who hadn't spoken in years, this was monumental. "Of course," Arthur answered, his voice a little rough. "I'll let the kitchen know." The legal proceedings moved quickly. Arthur's legal team arranged a meeting with Marcus Taylor at the correctional facility the following week. When Diane returned from the visit, she wore a cautious but hopeful expression. "They're filing the appeal next Monday," she told Arthur during one of Isabella's visits. Marcus couldn't believe it at first. He thought there had to be a catch. Arthur nodded. The system hasn't exactly given him many reasons to trust sudden help, especially from a wealthy white stranger. "No," Diane agreed, her tone quiet. "It hasn't." A faint tension settled between them both, fully aware of the social chasm that existed between their lived experiences. But then, unexpectedly, Leo appeared in the doorway. It was rare for him to leave his studio while Isabella visited. "Dad," he said softly. Arthur turned, stunned. It was the first time Leo had addressed him directly in over 2 years. "Can Isabella stay for dinner?" Arthur blinked, emotions rising too fast to control. "I think that can be arranged," he replied, voice tight with emotion. As Leo nodded and disappeared down the hall, Arthur sat in stunned silence. Diane pretended not to notice his eyes glistening, offering him the dignity of quiet understanding. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm took shape. Isabella now visited 4 afternoons each week after school. Leo's progress soared. He began speaking more often, first only to Isabella, then to Dr. Winters, and eventually to Arthur. In short, clear sentences. Arthur, once entirely consumed by Kingsley Technologies, now rearranged his schedule to be present during these visits. Sometimes, he even joined the children's art sessions, guided subtly by Isabella's intuitive understanding of Leo's needs. Meanwhile, the global soft merger moved forward without resistance. Whitfield had vanished from the corporate scene, and Arthur found himself delegating more, giving priority to his son over business in a way he'd never imagined possible. Each week brought updates from the legal team. Progress was steady. Then came the moment they'd hoped for. A judge granted an evidentiary hearing based on new, potentially exonerating evidence that had never been presented in Marcus's original trial. The fact that the judge granted this hearing is significant, Arthur's lead attorney explained to Diane. It means the court sees merit in our argument. Arthur watched Diane carefully, noting her calm demeanor, knowing it masked the guarded hope of someone who'd learned not to expect too much. That night, while Arthur tucked Leo into bed, a routine they'd slowly built, Leo spoke again. "Isabella's happy about her dad," he said, lining up his stuffed animals precisely. "But also scared." Arthur sat beside him, surprised, scared. "Did she say that?" Leo shook his head. "No, but I can tell. Like when you were scared, when I was in the hospital. Arthur was stunned. He'd once assumed Leo couldn't read emotions. Clearly he was wrong. You're right, Arthur said quietly. It's scary when someone you love is in trouble, even when things are getting better. Leo considered that, then asked, can we help them not be scared? Such a simple question, yet it held profound compassion. I think we can try, Arthur said. The very next day, Arthur sat with his executive team. I'll be taking a sabbatical, he announced. The room fell silent, effective immediately. Devon will serve as interim CEO, with my full support. Questions flew. What about the merger? Strategic initiatives? Arthur answered them calmly, having thought through every detail. My priorities have changed, he explained. The company will thrive without my daily presence. Later that day, when Diane arrived with Isabella, Arthur invited them to sit down. Leo's therapists think a change of environment could benefit his progress, he explained. So, I've leased a house on Long Island for 6 months. Lots of outdoor space, fewer sensory triggers. We're moving next week. He hesitated before continuing. There's a guest house on the property. If you and Isabella would consider staying there, it would help Leo maintain consistency through the transition. Diane was stunned. You want us to move to Long Island? She asked. But what about Isabella's school? My job search. She could attend the local school. It has an excellent arts program, Arthur offered. Or I can arrange private transportation if you prefer to keep her enrolled. Where she is, he continued. As for work, my foundation is hiring an administrative director. We're launching a new initiative to support families affected by wrongful incarceration. The position comes with housing. Diane eyed him warily. Is this a real job, or are you inventing one for your son's benefit? It's a real position, Arthur replied, and you're uniquely qualified. Your paralegal experience, your personal connection to the issue. We need someone who understands both the system and the stakes. He looked her in the eye. I won't deny that Leo's well-being is part of my motivation. But this isn't charity. It's opportunity, with purpose. After discussing it with Isabella, Diane accepted. 2 weeks later, both families moved into the Long Island property. The estate was peaceful and beautiful, an elegant main house, and a charming guest cottage connected by gardens. Leo thrived. The wide open spaces gave him room to breathe, to play, to grow, especially when Isabella was nearby. Arthur, now unburdened by corporate demands, spent his days truly getting to know his son, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a deeply sensitive, uniquely intelligent human being. As autumn arrived, painting the trees with fire and gold, Marcus Taylor's evident hearing loomed. The night before the court date, Arthur found Diane sitting alone on the guest house porch. Can't sleep? He asked gently, joining her. She nodded. Every time I let hope in, I'm scared it'll disappear again. We've been let down so many times. Arthur understood. The instinct to prepare for disappointment, especially when you've been hurt by hope, was powerful. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said softly, you won't face it alone. That I can promise. His quiet reassurance grounded her more than any speech could have. The next morning, as the families prepared for court, an unexpected guest arrived. It was Dr. Winters. I thought Leo might need some extra support today, she explained. Big events, even good ones, can be overwhelming. Arthur understood the care behind her visit. Everyone would be affected by what happened in court that day, but for Leo, it could be the most emotionally complex moment yet. Leo struggled with changes in routine and unfamiliar places, so having Dr. Winters nearby allowed Arthur and Diane to focus on the legal proceedings, confident that Leo was supported. At the courthouse, Arthur couldn't help but notice the stark contrast in how he and the Taylors were treated. Security personnel recognized him instantly, offering courtesy and expedited entry. while Diane and Isabella were subjected to extra screening. Court officials greeted Arthur with respect, but barely acknowledged Diane. These subtle but telling disparities, once invisible to him, now revealed themselves as the systemic inequities Diane and Marcus had long endured. The hearing itself was highly technical, focused on evidentiary omissions in Marcus's original trial. Hours passed as lawyers debated the mishandling of key details. Finally, the judge rendered his decision. The language was legalistic, but the meaning was clear. Marcus Taylor's conviction was vacated, and he would be released on his own recognizance. After nearly 7 years, Marcus would walk free pending a possible retrial. Though one seemed unlikely, processing would take a few hours. In the courthouse hallway, Isabella threw her arms around Diane, both of them crying with disbelief and joy. Arthur stepped aside to give them space, but Isabella suddenly turned and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for bringing my daddy home," she whispered. Arthur was stunned by the spontaneous gesture. In that moment, he felt something shift. The quiet satisfaction of witnessing justice for a family that had deserved it for so long surpassed any boardroom victory or corporate triumph. For the first time, he fully understood the purpose of his power and privilege. Marcus Taylor's release should have been a celebration. And it was, but it was also complicated. Freedom didn't erase trauma. It didn't heal the mental scars of prison life or instantly restore what had been lost. Arthur arranged for a private car to bring Marcus directly to the Long Island estate, ensuring privacy and dignity for the reunion. From a respectful distance, Arthur watched as Diane and Isabella ran to greet the vehicle. Marcus stepped out slowly, thinner than he looked in his case files, his movements cautious, as if still confined by invisible walls. But when he lifted Isabella into his arms, his face crumpled with raw emotion. Arthur turned away, feeling like an intruder on something too sacred for witness. That evening, Arthur received a message from Diane asking if he'd join them for coffee. He approached the guest house with uncharacteristic nervousness, unsure of how he'd be received. Marcus opened the door himself and extended a hand. "Mr. Kingsley," he said, his voice steady, despite the fatigue. "I understand I owe you my freedom." Arthur shook his hand firmly. "You owe me nothing, Mr. Taylor. The system failed you. We only helped fix what never should have been broken." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Please, come in." Inside, the mood was quietly joyful. Isabella sat pressed against her father, still clinging to him, as if afraid he'd vanish again. Diane poured coffee, her hands trembling slightly. The conversation began with polite thanks from Marcus, quickly met with Arthur's humble deflections, till Isabella broke the tension. "Daddy, Leo made something for you," she announced, retrieving a neatly wrapped package. "He wanted to give it to you himself," she added, "but he got nervous." Marcus unwrapped the package slowly. Inside was a framed drawing in Leo's distinctive style. 3 people standing before an open door, sunlight streaming through it. The symbolism was unmistakable, but deeply sincere. "It's beautiful," Marcus said softly. "Please thank him for me." He looked up at Arthur. "Your son, Isabella's told me a lot about him." A quiet understanding passed between the two men. Both had children who saw the world differently, and both had come to realize the world had to meet their children where they were not. The other way around. Over the following weeks, the two families settled into a new rhythm. Marcus, adjusting to freedom while managing nightmares and hypervigilance, found unexpected peace in Leo's studio. The quiet, structured environment calmed his nervous system, and Leo, intrigued by Marcus's artistic insights, spent hours learning new techniques. 1 month after his release, Arthur's legal team delivered monumental news. The district attorney had formally declined to retry the case. Marcus Taylor was officially exonerated. The civil lawsuit they filed against the police and prosecutor's office would take Time perhaps years, but the battle for Marcus's freedom was over. Still, freedom brought its own challenges. Marcus's former career in commercial art had evaporated. His network was gone, his confidence fragile. Arthur observed these struggles with growing concern. Legal vindication, he realized, didn't automatically equal a restored life. After consulting with Diane, Arthur broached a new conversation over dinner one evening. "We're launching a visual communications division at Kingsley Technologies," Arthur explained. "We need someone with a strong artistic voice to lead the creative direction." Marcus's expression was wary. "You think that should be me? A man who hasn't held a job in 7 years and never worked in corporate." "I do," Arthur replied steadily. "Anyone who kept making art under the most dehumanizing conditions imaginable has resilience in creativity. We can't teach." When Marcus didn't answer, Arthur added, "This isn't a handout. I've seen your work before and during prison. It's exceptional. You have a unique voice. The company would be lucky to have it." After several days of reflection, Marcus agreed in one condition. He would start in a consulting role. It was a compromise that gave him structure while preserving his independence. As autumn turned to winter, the temporary living arrangement at the Long Island estate began to feel permanent. Leo, once so dependent on rigid routines, was now showing incredible adaptability. He welcomed new activities, adjusted to small disruptions, and even began forming bonds beyond Isabella and his therapists. During one session, Dr. Winters observed with pride, "Leo's progress has surpassed my expectations. The stability of having Isabella nearby and your consistent involvement has made all the difference." She paused. "But I'm concerned. What happens when you return to the city? When you resume your corporate role?" The question caught Arthur off guard. He hadn't thought much about returning. He'd been so focused on Leo, on the Taylors, on healing he hadn't asked himself what came next. Would Leo regress without this environment? Would the company falter without him? That evening, Arthur watched Leo and Isabella build a blanket fort in the living room, with Marcus sketching blueprints for their structure. The scene, so ordinary, was extraordinary in its warmth. This, Arthur realized, was the kind of life no amount of money had ever bought him. The next week, Arthur convened a board meeting, this time from his Long Island study, via video call. "I'm extending my sabbatical indefinitely," he announced. "Devon has led brilliantly in my absence, and the company is thriving. I'll remain involved, but no longer as CEO." Gasps of surprise followed, but Arthur felt nothing but relief. For the first time in his life, his identity wasn't tied to the company. That same day, Diane received notice from her Brooklyn landlord. Their lease wouldn't be renewed. The building was being converted to luxury condos. "We'll need to start looking," she told Marcus that night. "The foundation covers housing for a few more months, but after that," they were sitting on the main house patio, bundled in sweaters, while Arthur grilled in the December cold. Arthur, overhearing, set down his drink. "Actually, I've been meaning to bring this up." Both turned to look at him. "There's a carriage house on the far side of the property. It's structurally sound, just needs some renovations. If you're interested, it could be a permanent home for your family." The offer hung in the air, its meaning much larger than just real estate. Beyond the offer of housing, Diane and Marcus exchanged a glance that held an entire silent conversation. "That's generous," Marcus said carefully, "but we need to stand on our own, especially now." Arthur nodded, fully understanding. "The carriage house would be part of your compensation package. You choose to accept the full-time position at Kingsley Technologies," he explained. "It's completely separate from any personal arrangement." That clarification eased the tension in the room. They all recognized how complex their lives had become, so closely intertwined by circumstance and choice. Yet, amid the adult calculations, Isabella focused on what mattered most. Does that mean we'd live here all the time? She asked. Leo and I could go to the same school. Her words cut through everything. This friendship, this bond had sparked the change in all of them. Before anyone could respond, Leo spoke up. I want Isabella to stay, he said clearly. She's my best friend. The room went still. Leo's voice, still rare enough to stop conversations, settled something in all their hearts. Whatever complications existed, their children's connection came first. The winter holidays brought another milestone. Leo, who had once found celebrations overwhelming, asked to have a birthday party for his 8th birthday. Who do you want to invite? Arthur asked, expecting a short list. Leo thought for a moment, then counted on his fingers. Dr. Winters, Mrs. Chen, Isabella, her mom and dad. He paused, then added, and Grandpa and Grandma. Arthur froze. His own parents had visited only twice since Catherine's death. Their relationship with Leo had been strain-marred by misunderstanding and unkind comments about how Leo just needed more discipline. Are you sure? Arthur asked gently. We haven't seen them in a long time. Leo nodded. Isabella says families should be together on important days, even when it's hard. The wisdom of his 7-year-old son left Arthur silent. The party became more than a birth date, became a reconciliation. Arthur's parents arrived, formal and awkward, bearing expensive gifts and polite phrases about Leo's progress. But they weren't prepared for the boy who greeted them, still autistic, still unique, but engaged, expressive, and completely himself. With Isabella nearby as his social interpreter and anchor, Leo navigated the gathering with ease. By evenings, Arthur saw his mother wiping away tears as Leo showed his grandfather a drawing. He's remarkable, she whispered to Arthur. We didn't understand. We thought you were failing him, Arthur replied quietly. I was. But not in the way you thought. She reached over and squeezed his hand, an unexpected gesture. You found your way to him. That's what matters. As snow blanketed the Long Island property in January, another new chapter began. The civil rights attorneys representing Marcus suggested a public interview to spotlight his wrongful conviction. Once Arthur would have refused such exposure, especially for Leo. But now, he agreed. The interview took place at the Long Island home, both families participating in a carefully structured conversation. The resulting feature in the New York Times Sunday magazine, Unlikely Allies, How Two Families Crossed America's Divides, was thoughtful and powerful. It didn't just tell Marcus's story. It explored the bond between two children that had bridged lines of race, class, and neurodivergence. The article made waves. Arthur and Marcus were invited to speak at universities, legal conferences, and autism advocacy forums. But the most profound moment came, not in public, but in private. One quiet evening in early spring, Arthur sat on the porch swing with Leo, watching fireflies blink to life in the dusk. Leo leaned against him, contact that would have overwhelmed him not long ago. Dad, he said softly, are you still sad about Mom? Arthur's heart clenched. Catherine's absence had long been a silent ache in their home, never spoken of. Too heavy to unpack. Yes, Arthur answered honestly. I miss her every day. Leo nodded. I'm sad too, he said, but also happy now. He pointed across the lawn to the warmly lit guest house, where the Taylors were preparing dinner. Because we found new people to love. Arthur couldn't speak. His brilliant, beautiful son, once unreachable, behind silence, had found words, found love, and found him again. He wrapped his arm around Leo's shoulders, realizing the truth. Leo had saved him far more than the other way around. Exactly 1 year after Leo had first spoken to Isabella, both families gathered in the main house to celebrate what they now called their connection anniversary. The space reflected their transformation. Leo's artwork covered the walls where cold corporate pieces once hung, Family photos replaced awards. The room felt lived in, warm, full of joy. Arthur stood by the window, quietly watching. 8-year-old Leo sat cross-legged on the floor with Isabella, their heads bent together over a drawing. Leo still had sensory sensitivities and needed structure, but he navigated the world now with growing confidence because he was accepted, not just accommodated. At the dining table, Diane arranged food with practiced ease. She was now the executive director of the Kingsley Foundation, overseeing a broad portfolio of social justice, programs from criminal justice reform to neurodivergent education. Marcus led the visual communications division at Kingsley Technologies, his artistic vision reshaping the company's public image. His personal artwork, bold, moving pieces about justice and redemption, had earned spots in major galleries. They lived permanently in the carriage house, now a solution that honored both their independence and the bond between the children. Though the arrangement had once drawn judgment, that criticism had faded as Leo flourished and Isabella thrived alongside him. The Times article had sparked something bigger. Autism organizations and criminal justice advocates had begun working together, modeling initiatives after what became known as the Leo-Isabella Modla, fusion of creativity, safety, and human connection. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Diane asked, joining Arthur at the window. "Just thinking about how much has changed," he said. "A year ago, I measured success in market share and margins. And now?" she asked. "Now I measure it in words spoken. Families reunited. Moments like this." He gestured toward the room filled with laughter, warmth, and the people he now considered family. Just then, Leo approached with purpose. Isabella followed, encouraging with a gentle smile. "Dad," Leo said, making clear eye contact, something once unimaginable. "I want to make an announcement at dinner." Arthur nodded, stunned. "Of course, whenever you're ready." Dinner had become sacred. Every night, both families gathered, no matter what. As they settled around the table, Leo stood. His hands fluttered briefly, his stimming behavior, but then stilled. "I have something important to say," he began, his voice stronger than ever. "1 year ago today, I said bless you to Isabella when she sneezed. Those were my first words since Mom died." The room fell silent. Before Isabella, I was alone inside myself. Words felt trapped. He touched his throat, but she didn't try to pull the words out. She just made me feel safe, and the words found their way. Isabella reached for his hand, natural, unself-conscious. "So I want to thank everyone," Leo continued. "Isabella, for being my first friend. Diane and Marcus, for letting her be my friend, even when it was hard. Dr. Winters, for helping me need people, not just therapy." Then he turned to Arthur, "And Dad, for listening. Even when I wasn't talking." There was a hush. Then Marcus chuckled softly, breaking the tension. As dinner resumed, Arthur and Marcus discussed the Foundation's newest initiative, an art therapy program for children with incarcerated parents. "We're launching pilot programs in 3 states, Marcus explained, using the Leo-Isabella model, helping kids express connection through creativity when words are too hard. "The first training sessions begin next month," Diane added. "We're focusing on maximum security facilities, where the trauma is most severe." Arthur was amazed. What had begun as a personal struggle had grown into real, systemic change. Later that night, as dishes were cleared and candles burned low, Leo approached Arthur again. "Dad," he said quietly, "I want to visit Mom's grave tomorrow." Arthur looked at him, surprised. "With Isabella," Leo added, "if that's okay." The request stunned Arthur, not just for its sensitivity, but for what it meant. Leo was ready to face the past, and he didn't want to do it alone. They had only visited Catherine's grave once since the funeral. The experience had overwhelmed Leo and left Arthur heartbroken. "Are you sure you're ready?" Arthur asked gently. Leo nodded. Isabella helped me make something, a special drawing, to show Mom I'm talking again. The next morning, the small group moved through the quiet cemetery, Arthur and Leo in front, Isabella close behind, with Diane and Marcus giving them space. At Catherine's headstone, Leo knelt and placed his drawing at its base, a family portrait, where Catherine watched from above, with Leo, Arthur, Isabella, and her parents all drawn together in one circle. "Hi, Mom," Leo said clearly, gripping Arthur's hand for support. "I'm sorry I stopped talking after you left. I was too sad to find words." Arthur knelt beside him, his grief rising like it was fresh. "Your mom would be so proud of you," he whispered, his voice thick. "So proud of how brave you've been." Leo leaned gently against him. "Isabella says people we love aren't really gone if we keep talking about them. So I want to talk about Mom more often, if it makes you sad sometimes." His words so simple, so wise, left Arthur stunned. Isabella had taught Leo something profound about grief, about love, about healing. "I'd like that very much," Arthur said quietly. As they walked away from the grave, Arthur found himself beside Diane, while the children ran ahead with Marcus. "Thank you," Arthur said, sincere and steady, "for everything you and your family have brought into our lives." Diane shook her head. "This journey changed all of us. Isabella found her voice by helping Leo find his. Marcus rediscovered purpose through his art, and I found work that actually matters." She looked toward the children. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." And next arrived faster than they expected. The following week, Kingsley Technologies received a record-breaking acquisition offer from a global conglomerate, an offer that would make Arthur and his shareholders unimaginably wealthy. But the company's values, its inclusive culture, and social initiatives could be at risk. At the same time, Marcus received a prestigious offer, an artist residency at a top European university. It was the kind of opportunity that could redefine his career. But it would mean relocating to Brussels. During a long walk around the property, Arthur and Marcus shared their uncertainties. 3 years in Brussels would open doors for my work, Marcus admitted. But pulling Isabella away from this, life away from Leo, he didn't finish. Arthur nodded. "And the acquisition could multiply the foundation's reach, but I might lose control of everything we've built." They fell into thoughtful silence until Marcus spoke again. "Remember when our biggest concern was whether our kids could even be friends?" Arthur smiled. "Simpler times." "Not simpler," Marcus corrected. "Just a different kind of complicated." The solution, as always, came from the children. During dinner, the Brussels opportunity was discussed openly. To everyone's surprise, Isabella spoke first. "We could use video calls," she offered. "Leo and I can talk every day, and we can visit on holidays." Leo, who once would have panicked at such a change, simply nodded. "And I could come to Brussels sometimes. Dad says I should see more of the world." Their flexibility, their clarity, humbled the adults again. "When did they become the wise ones?" Diane whispered to Arthur. "Maybe they always were," he said softly. "We just weren't listening." The decisions that followed weren't easy, but they were made together. Marcus accepted the Brussels offer with a modified 3-year plan. Returning to the U.S. regularly, Arthur negotiated the acquisition in his terms. He insisted on strict clauses to protect diversity initiatives, employee benefits, and the company's social commitments. The deal went through with those values intact. Most importantly, both families committed to keeping Leo and Isabella connected through travel, tech, and shared projects. 6 months later, as the Taylors prepared to move abroad, another milestone brought them all together. The launch of Finding Our Voices, a children's book, co-created by Leo and Isabella, with Marcus's illustrations. It told the story of 2 very different kids who helped each other overcome silence, fear, and difference through friendship and art. At a cozy bookstore celebration, Leo did something unimaginable. Just 2 years prior, he stood up and read aloud from their book. Sometimes the words get stuck inside you. He read slowly, clearly, like birds in a cage. And sometimes, the only person who can open that cage is a friend who doesn't mind if the birds take their time. Arthur looked around the room, Dr. Winters beaming, Mrs. Chen dabbing tears, his own parents quietly watching Leo with pride, staff from the foundation, community partners, advocates, every life touched by a simple bond between two children, and in the center, Leo and Isabella, friends, co-creators, the spark of it all. Later that evening, after the Taylors returned to the guest house for final packing, Arthur and Leo sat together on their usual porch swing. "I'm going to miss Isabella," Leo said, calm and matter, "but I'm not scared anymore." Arthur wrapped his arm around his son. "What changed?" Leo thought for a moment, as he often did, before answering. "Before, I thought being different meant being alone. But Isabella showed me that's not true. Different people can understand each other, if they try." The wisdom in that moment, the clarity of it left Arthur silent. His son, once lost in silence, had become his greatest teacher. "You know," Arthur said, "I think that might be the most important thing anyone ever learns." Above them, the stars blinked into view, and father and son rocked gently, quiet in the way that no longer meant loneliness but peace. Has a child ever taught you something that changed your life? We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. If this journey through silence, prejudice, and healing touched your heart, please tap the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Share this video with someone who might need hope, who might be waiting for the right voice or friend to help them find their way out of silence. Thank you for walking with us on this path of rediscovery, resilience, and connection. Until next time, remember, the most powerful connections often begin with simply seeing someone, truly seeing them as they are. And sometimes, the smallest voices carry the most profound truths.